Captain Sarah Chun stepped onto the Quantico firing range as morning sun cut through the Virginia humidity. The joint training exercise had drawn SEAL teams from Dam Neck, their presence marked by the cluster of tan uniforms gathered near the observation tower. She adjusted the rifle case on her shoulder and moved toward the check-in station where Staff Sergeant Mike Rodriguez was processing shooters. Commander Jack Brennan watched her approach from the tower platform. He leaned toward the two SEAL officers beside him and spoke just loud enough to carry. Diversity hire probably can't qualify past 800 meters. The men smirked as Chun passed below them, her expression unchanged. Rodriguez caught the comment. He finished logging Chin's credentials and handed her a lane assignment card without meeting her eyes. The tension settled across the range like morning dew, visible to anyone paying attention. Chun drew lane 7, directly adjacent to where Brennan's team was setting up their equipment. The commander was checking his rifle, a customized 13 Malawian Quachas with competition glass, when she placed her case on the bench beside his position. He glanced at her setup and turned to his spotter. "Watch this. Gonna be educational about what happens when standards drop." Rodriguez climbed onto the tower platform and keyed his microphone. "All shooters, this is a 1,200-meter qualification course. 5 rounds, 5 targets, you need 4 hits for passing. Wind is southeast at 6 miles per hour, temperature 74 degrees. Range goes hot in 5 minutes. Brennan stretched and addressed his team with practice volume. "I'll buy drinks tonight if she hits 3 out of 5. His men laughed, the sound bouncing across the range. Chin opened her case and began assembling her rifle, a precision-built M40A6 that had traveled with her through 2 deployments. Maybe some of you watching this know what it feels like. You show up somewhere new, California to Virginia or Texas to Maine, and someone decides what you can do before you've done anything. You see it in how they look at you, hear it in what they don't say directly. That weight settles on your shoulders along with your gear, and you've got 2 choices. Let it crush you or use it as motivation to prove something that shouldn't need proving." The range went hot. Chun assumed her position in lane 7, stock pressed to her shoulder, breathing controlled and mechanical. 1,200 meters downrange, 5 steel silhouettes waited in the heat shimmer. She found her sight picture, waited for her natural respiratory pause, and pressed through the trigger brake. The rifle bucked. For 0.2 seconds later, the first target rang with metallic impact. Brennan fired his first round. His spotter called the hit, right edge. Chin's second target went down center mass. The third, the fourth, the fifth. Rodriguez watched through his spotting scope and made notes on his tablet. Chin's targets showed tight grouping, all impacts within the 8-inch center ring. Brennan's team finished their string with scattered hits, 3 men qualifying, 2 falling short. The commander himself had 4 hits, 1 round sailing high in the wind. The range went cold. Shooters safed their weapons and moved to the scoring table where Rodriguez was tallying results. He posted numbers on the board. Chin 98%, Brennan's team averaging 76% across 5 shooters. Brennan studied the board and shook his head. 1,200 meters isn't real sniping. That's just marksmanship fundamentals. Anybody can do that with enough practice. He turned to face Chun directly. Real sniping is 2,000 meters plus, where the math gets complicated and the wind makes liars out of ballistic computers. His team gathered behind him, their body language shifting to match his aggressive posture. Chun met his eyes. "I'm familiar with distance shooting, Commander." Brennan's smile was thin. "I bet you are, Captain. Tell you what, I'll request a real course from the rangemaster. 2,500 meters, variable wind, moving sun. We'll see how familiar you are then." He walked toward the operations office without waiting for her response, his men following in formation. Rodriguez approached Chun as she was breaking down her rifle. "That was exceptional shooting, Captain." She thanked him and continued her task, hands moving with the efficiency of countless repetitions. He watched her work for a moment before speaking again. "Commander Brennan just requested a 2,500-meter challenge course. Colonel Hayes will probably approve it." Chun paused, a cleaning rod in her hand. "When?" "Tomorrow, if the weather holds. Brennan's staking his team's reputation on it." Rodriguez hesitated, then added, "He's done this before. Challenges shooters he thinks don't belong. Sets up scenarios designed to expose weakness. Usually works because most people aren't ready for that kind of pressure and distance." Chun resumed, cleaning her rifle. "What's the longest confirmed shot on this range?" 2,300 meters, set by a Marine Scout sniper 3 years ago. Rodriguez checked his watch. "I need to file the course request with the colonel." He left Chin alone on the firing line. Her equipment spread across the bench in organized sections. The afternoon light shifted as she finished her maintenance routine. Brennan's voice carried from the observation tower, where he was briefing his team on tomorrow's plan. His confidence was absolute, his gestures broad and commanding. Chun packed her gear and headed toward the armory, already calculating bullet drop and wind drift for 2,500 meters, the numbers flowing through her mind like a familiar prayer. Rodriguez walked into the range operations office, carrying his tablet with the day's qualification scores. Colonel Patricia Hayes looked up from her desk as he entered, her reading glasses perched on the bridge of her nose. She gestured toward the chair across from her. "How did the joint exercise go, Staff Sergeant?" Rodriguez set the tablet on her desk. "Marine shooters performed well. Captain Chun from 2nd Battalion scored 98% at 1,200 meters." Hayes raised an eyebrow and picked up the device, scrolling through the results. SEAL teams averaged lower, Commander Brennan's group at 76%. Hayes studied the numbers. "And Commander Brennan's response?" Rodriguez shifted in his chair. "He's requesting a challenge course at 2,500 meters. Says 1,200 isn't real sniping. Made the request about an hour ago. Should be in your email." Hayes opened her laptop and found the message. She read it twice, her expression neutral. Then she opened another window and pulled up Chin's service record. 2 deployments to Afghanistan, 47 confirmed eliminations, Marine Corps Expert Rifle Badge, Scout Sniper School Distinguished Graduate. She leaned back in her chair. "Tell me about Brennan's behavior during the qualification." Rodriguez described the comments, the betting, the dismissive tone that had colored the entire exercise. Hayes listened without interrupting, her fingers drumming once on the desk before going still. "This isn't the first time, is it?" "No, ma'am." Rodriguez kept his voice even. "Third female Marine in 2 years that Commander Brennan has challenged. First 2 declined and requested transfers to different training rotations." Hayes closed the laptop. "I'm approving the challenge course, but with conditions. Independent verification team, official documentation, full ballistic analysis. If Brennan wants to make this educational, we'll ensure the lesson is properly recorded." She began typing an email. "Give me a list of available senior snipers for the verification team. I want 3 with combat experience, plus Major Williams from ballistics." Rodriguez stood. "Yes, ma'am. When should I schedule it?" "Tomorrow afternoon, if weather permits." Hayes finished her email and hit send. "And Staff Sergeant, make sure Captain Chin knows this will be officially documented. If she performs well, it goes in her record. If she doesn't, same thing." Chin learned about the approved challenge when Rodriguez called her quarters that evening. She sat at her desk with a notepad, already filling it with calculations as he explained the setup. 2,500 meters, independent verification, full documentation. "What are the wind conditions forecast for tomorrow?" Rodriguez checked his phone. 4 to 8 miles per hour variable, southwest. Temperature climbing to 78 by afternoon. Humidity around 50%. Chin wrote the numbers down. "Equipment? Your choice. Armory's open until 2100 if you need to check out something specific." After the call ended, Chin pulled up ballistics software on her laptop. The Chaytak M200 intervention would be ideal for this range, chambered in .408 that could handle the distance better than her M40A6. She grabbed her jacket and headed for the armory. The weapons specialist on duty was Corporal Jenkins, a slight man with careful hands who treated every rifle like precision machinery. Chin explained what she needed, and he disappeared into the vault, returning with a case that he opened on the counter. The Chaytak inside was immaculate, its barrel recently replaced according to the maintenance log. "This one's zeroed at 500 meters, Jenkins said. Ballistic data's in the system if you want to run your calculations. You planning for the Brennan Challenge? Word travels fast. Jenkins smiled. Whole base knows about it. He handed her the case along with a cleaning kit and 3 boxes of match-grade ammunition. Bring her back in the same condition, ma'am. Chen spent 2 hours at her desk that night. The ballistic computer spat out drop tables and wind drift calculations. At 2,500 meters, the bullet would drop over 70 feet and take nearly 4 seconds to reach the target. An 8-mile-per-hour crosswind would push the round 18 inches off course. She made notes in the margins, drew diagrams, visualized the shot sequence. Her phone buzzed with a text from her former platoon commander in Afghanistan. Heard you're making history tomorrow. Remember Sanjin? She remembered. October 2022, Overwatch position on a compound roof. Insurgent mortar team setting up 2,800 meters away across a river valley. The math had been impossible, the wind gusting and variable, her spotter saying it couldn't be done. She'd sent the round anyway and watched through her scope as the target dropped 4.3 seconds later. That shot had never been officially documented. Combat chaos, no verification team, just her spotter's confirmation and a mortar team that stopped firing. She'd written in her personal log, but never submitted it through channels. Chen pulled out that log now, a battered notebook she'd carried through both deployments. The entry from Sanjin included wind data, temperature, estimated range, bullet impact. She'd measured the distance afterward using mapping software. 2,847 meters. Tomorrow's shot would be shorter. Controlled conditions, known distance, stable platform. She closed the notebook and started drafting her shooting plan. Brennan spent his evening differently. His team gathered in his quarters, drinking beer and reviewing their own equipment. His spotter, Lieutenant Morrison, was quieter than usual. You really want to do this, sir? Morrison set his beer down. Her quals today were solid. This could backfire. Brennan waved the concern away. She got lucky with ideal conditions and a friendly range master. 2,500 meters is different. The pressure alone will break her concentration. He took a long drink. Besides, this needs to happen. People need to see what happens when you prioritize diversity over capability. Morrison didn't respond. The other team members nodded along with Brennan's assessment, but their enthusiasm seemed forced. They'd all seen Chen's target groupings, the tight cluster that spoke to genuine skill rather than fortune. The commander stood and grabbed another beer from the cooler. I've been doing this for 17 years. I know the difference between a competent shooter and someone who's out of their depth. Tomorrow will prove it. His team echoed agreement, but Morrison stared at his beer and said nothing. Hayes worked late in her office, reviewing Brennan's service record with growing concern. 4 years of exemplary combat performance, decorated for actions in Iraq and Syria, promoted ahead of peers. But the last 2 years showed a different pattern. 3 formal complaints about integration initiatives, each one carefully worded to avoid overt discrimination while questioning standards and readiness. 2 female Marines had requested transfers from training rotations after interactions with Brennan. Both had cited hostile environment without providing specifics. Hayes had noted the pattern but lacked concrete evidence for action. Until now, tomorrow would provide documentation, one way or another. She drafted an email to the SEAL liaison officer, a courtesy heads-up about the challenge and its official nature. Then she reviewed the verification team Roster Rodriguez had sent. 3 combat snipers, Major Williams from ballistics and Rodriguez himself as range master. All experienced, all beyond reproach. Hayes closed her laptop and looked out at the darkened range. Somewhere in the barracks, 2 people were preparing for tomorrow with very different expectations. One anticipated vindication, the other validation. Only the shot itself would determine which was justified. The range crew arrived before dawn to set up targets at 2,500 meters. Rodriguez supervised the placement personally, using a laser rangefinder to verify the exact distance 3 separate times. His team mounted steel silhouettes on reinforced stands, then positioned verification cameras at multiple angles to document any impacts. The eastern sky was turning gray when Major Williams arrived with his meteorological equipment. He set up weather stations at the firing line and downrange, comparing readings to ensure accurate wind data. Temperature 59 degrees and climbing, humidity 62%, wind variable from the southwest at 5 to 7 miles per hour. Rodriguez checked the camera feeds on his tablet. All angles clear, recording started. Williams joined him, and they reviewed the ballistic projections one final time. At this distance with current conditions, the bullet would drop approximately 73 feet and drift 16 inches in a sustained 7-mile-per-hour crosswind. How many people have qualified at 2,500 on this range? Williams pulled up the records on his phone. 11 attempts in the last 5 years. For successful, all required multiple rounds. Best single-shot accuracy was 0.6 meters off-center. The observation area began filling before sunrise. Marines from the base arrived in clusters, taking positions along the tower and berms. SEAL teams came separately, establishing their own section with clear sight lines to the target. By 0730, over 30 personnel had gathered despite no official announcement. Hayes arrived at 0745 with the verification team. 3 senior snipers, each with multiple combat deployments, set up spotting scopes at designated positions. She briefed them quietly while Rodriguez prepared the range documentation. This is an official qualification attempt. Full documentation, independent verification from 3 separate positions, ballistic analysis to follow. If Captain Chen succeeds, it goes into the record. If she fails, same thing. We document what happens, nothing more. Brennan appeared at 0758 with his team. His uniform was crisp, but his eyes showed fatigue. He positioned himself near the SEAL section, scanning the crowd with visible satisfaction at the turnout. Morrison stood beside him, his expression carefully neutral. "Good morning." For a teaching moment, Brennan announced to the gathered SEALs. His voice carried across the range. Real sniping at real distances. This is where fundamentals meet physics, and most people discover their limitations. The Marines in attendance remained quiet, but their presence was pointed. They lined the berms in groups, arms crossed, watching. Rodriguez climbed the observation tower and keyed his microphone. Range is prepared for official qualification attempt. Shooter will have 5 rounds for familiarization, then 3 rounds for record. Verification team is in position. He glanced at his watch. Shooter has been notified to report at 0800. Chen arrived at 0715 carrying the Chaytak case and a range bag with her support equipment. She'd been awake since 0430, reviewing her calculations and conducting mental rehearsals of the shot sequence. The crowd registered in her peripheral vision, but she kept her focus on the firing line. Hayes intercepted her near the equipment table. "Captain, this is now an official qualification attempt with full documentation. Your performance will be recorded and submitted to Marine Corps records. Do you understand?" "Yes, ma'am." Hayes gestured toward the verification team. 3 independent observers, ballistic analysis from Major Williams, range master documentation from Staff Sergeant Rodriguez. Everything by the book. Chen nodded and moved to the firing position. She unpacked the Chaytak methodically, checking the scope mounting, verifying the bolt operation, loading a magazine with 5 rounds for her familiarization string. The routine calmed her breathing, brought her heart rate down into the controlled zone she needed. Brennan approached the firing line with his team. He stopped 10 feet from Chen's position. "Captain Chen, appreciate you taking on this challenge." He smiled broadly. "No shame in missing at this range. Most shooters never even attempt it. The math is complicated, the wind plays tricks, and the pressure documentation makes people second-guess themselves." Chen finished her equipment check and looked at him directly. "I understand the challenges, Commander." "I'm sure you do." Brennan's smile widened. "Just wanted you to know there's no embarrassment in acknowledging when a shot is beyond your capability. We can call this off, save everyone the time." His team stood behind him, Morrison's gaze fixed on the distant target. The range is prepared and the verification team is ready. Chen's tone was flat, professional. "I'll be taking the shot." Brennan held her gaze for 3 seconds before stepping back. "Your call, Captain." He returned to the observation area, where the SEAL section had grown to 15 personnel. Rodriguez climbed down from the tower and approached the firing line. He handed Chin a wind meter and pointed downrange. "Current conditions are optimal. Wind steady at 6 miles per hour, temperature 68 degrees, humidity dropping." He paused. "I've been range master here for 32 years. Never seen a successful first-round hit at this distance." Chin took the wind meter and checked the readings. "Understood, Staff Sergeant." Hayes joined them and addressed the entire crowd through Rodriguez's microphone. "This is an official Marine Corps qualification attempt at 2,500 meters. Observation is permitted, but silence is required once the range goes hot. All personnel maintain position behind the firing line." She handed the microphone back to Rodriguez. Chun assumed her position behind the Chaitak, settling into her shooting mat with practiced efficiency. She adjusted the bipod height, checked her scope level, verified her cheek weld. The familiarization rounds would let her confirm her calculations before the official attempts. Rodriguez raised his hand. "Range is going hot in 30 seconds. Final wind check shows 6.2 miles per hour from the southwest. Temperature 70 degrees. All verification positions report ready." Williams confirmed from his position. Cameras recording, ballistic computers tracking. The 3 verification snipers called in sequence. Observer 1 ready. Observer 2 ready. Observer 3 ready. Rodriguez dropped his hand. "Range is hot." Chun controlled her breathing, found her natural respiratory pause, and pressed through the trigger. The rifle recoiled smoothly against her shoulder. For 0.1 seconds later, the verification team's spotting scopes tracked the impact. Observer 1 called first. "Hit, right edge of target, approximately 0.4 meters right of center." Observer 2 confirmed. "Hit, right edge, concur with 0.4 meters." Observer 3 added his assessment. "Impact, right edge, wind drift visible." Chin absorbed the information and made her adjustment. She'd calculated for 6 miles per hour, but the actual wind was pushing 6.2. She dialed her windage turret left, adding 0.8 minutes of angle correction. The second familiarization round flew downrange. This time the impact was closer to center. Observer 1. Hit, 0.2 meters right of center. Chun made a smaller adjustment and fired her third familiarization round. The impact moved left of center by 0.1 meters. She was bracketing the target, refining her data with each shot. The fourth and fifth familiarization rounds both struck within 0.2 meters of center. Rodriguez announced over the microphone, "Familiarization string complete. Shooter will now begin official qualification attempt. 3 rounds for record. Best single shot will be documented." The crowd pressed closer to the observation line. Brennan's smile had faded into concentration. Hay stood with her arms crossed, watching through binoculars. Chin reloaded her magazine with 3 fresh rounds. She assumed her shooting position again, slower this time, more deliberate. Her breathing cycled through its pattern as she found her sight picture 2,500 meters downrange. The target wavered in the heat shimmer, a dark shape against brown earth. Rodriguez's voice was quiet through the speakers. "Range remains hot. Official attempt, round 1. Chin fired. The bullet arced across the morning sky, its trajectory invisible to the naked eye, but tracked by the verification team through their optics. For 0.1 seconds of flight time felt infinite. The target rang with metallic impact, the sound reaching the firing line a moment later. Observer 1 spoke clearly. "Hit dead center. 0 deviation visible." Observer 2 confirmed. "Center mass hit. No measurable deviation." Observer 3 added. "Perfect impact, center of target." The Marine section erupted in spontaneous applause before catching themselves and going silent. The SEAL section remained motionless. Brennan stared downrange, his jaw tight. Chun safed her rifle and stood, her expression unchanged. Rodriguez documented the impact coordinates on his tablet, while the verification team confirmed measurements through their spotting scopes. Williams checked his ballistic computer against the actual impact data, nodding as the numbers aligned with theoretical projections. Hayes approached the firing line and examined the target through her binoculars. The hit was visible even at 2,500 meters, a clear strike in the center ring. She lowered the binoculars and turned to Chun. "Outstanding shooting, Captain. 2 rounds remaining for your official qualification." Chun acknowledged and returned to her shooting position. The crowd had grown quiet again, the earlier applause replaced by tense silence. Brennan stood with his arms crossed, his expression hardening as he watched Chun prepare for her second shot. Morrison leaned toward him and spoke quietly. "That was a perfect hit, sir. Maybe we should—" Brennan cut him off. "One shot proves nothing. Wind can shift, conditions change. Let's see if she can repeat it." The verification team reset their equipment and confirmed readiness. Rodriguez checked wind conditions again and called out the update. Wind holding steady at 6.3 miles per hour. Temperature now 72 degrees. Chun settled into her position with the same deliberate routine. Her breathing cycled through its pattern as she acquired her sight picture. The morning sun was climbing higher, creating more heat shimmer downrange. She adjusted her focus, finding the target through the wavering air. Rodriguez announced, "Official attempt, round 2." The rifle spoke and Chun rode the recoil, maintaining her sight picture to observe impact. The bullet's flight seemed longer this time, awareness stretching to 4 seconds into something more substantial. Then the target rang again. Observer 1 called the impact. Hit, 0.2 meters left of center. Observer 2 confirmed. Hit left of center, within scoring zone. Observer 3 added his assessment. Solid hit, high-quality shooting. The Marine section stirred with approval, but maintained silence. Chun safed her rifle and stood, her movements economical and practiced. She had 1 round remaining. Brennan turned to his team. "See the deviation? Wind caught that one. 3rd shot will be worse. The pressure's building on her now." His team nodded, but Morrison's eyes remained on the target downrange. Hayes joined Williams at his monitoring station. "What's your analysis, Major?" Williams pulled up his data on the tablet. Both shots were exceptional. First round was dead center with perfect wind reading. Second round showed slight overcorrection, but still well within qualification standards. He zoomed in on the ballistic trace. At this range, being within 0.2 meters is remarkable accuracy. And the third shot? Williams glanced at the wind meters. Conditions are stable. If she maintains her fundamentals, there's no reason she can't match her first round. Rodriguez approached Chun at the equipment table where she was checking her final round. "You've already qualified with 2 solid hits, Captain. 3rd round is just documentation at this point." Chun seated the round in the magazine. "I understand, Staff Sergeant." He watched her for a moment. "That first shot was the best I've seen at this range in 3 decades. You've got nothing left to prove." Chun loaded the magazine into the rifle. "Respectfully, I have 1 round left in my qualification string." Rodriguez smiled slightly and returned to his position. He keyed his microphone. "Final round for official qualification. Shooter is ready, verification team standing by." The crowd pressed against the observation line. Even the SEAL section had moved closer, their earlier confidence replaced by focused attention. Brennan stood at the front of his group, his jaw clenched as he watched Chun assume her shooting position for the 3rd time. She went through her routine without variation. Equipment check, breathing control, sight picture acquisition. The target sat 2,500 meters away, a steel silhouette that had already been hit twice. Heat shimmer made it dance in her scope, but her focus penetrated the distortion. Williams monitored his instruments. Wind 6.4 miles per hour, slight increase. Temperature 73 degrees. Rodriguez waited for Chen's signal. She raised her left hand slightly, indicating readiness, then returned it to her support position on the rifle. He announced, "Official attempt, round 3, range remains hot." Chen found her natural respiratory pause. The world narrowed to her sight picture, the target centered in her reticle. She pressed through the trigger brake with steady pressure. The Chaytak recoiled and the round arced downrange. For 0.1 seconds of flight time, The verification team tracked the bullet's trajectory through their scopes, watching as it covered the distance. The target rang for the third time. Observer 1 spoke immediately. Hit, center mass, deviation less than 0.1 meters right. Observer 2 confirmed. Center mass hit, near perfect placement. Observer 3 concluded. Exceptional shot, matches first round quality. The Marines section erupted in applause, no longer restraining themselves. Shouts of approval and congratulations echoed across the range. Several Marines approached the firing line, though they stopped at the designated boundary. The SEAL section remained silent. Brennan stared downrange, his face flushed. Morrison stood beside him, saying nothing. Hayes walked to the firing line and extended her hand to Chun. 3 for 3 at 2,500 meters. That's going in the books, Captain. Chun shook her hand. Thank you, ma'am. Rodriguez climbed down from the tower and joined them. I need to retrieve the target for documentation. He gestured to his range crew, and they headed downrange with measuring equipment. Williams approached with his tablet showing the ballistic analysis. All 3 shots met or exceeded qualification standards. First and third rounds were nearly identical placement. Second round showed minor deviation but remained well within parameters. He pulled up a comparison chart. This performance ranks in the top 5% of all recorded attempts at this distance. Hayes examined the data. Prepare a full report for Marine Corps records. Include all verification team statements, ballistic analysis, and video documentation. This qualifies as a distinguished marksmanship achievement. Brennan approached the group, his team trailing behind him. His smile was forced, his voice carrying across the range. Well, Captain Chun, congratulations on a successful qualification. 3 hits at 2,500 meters is certainly adequate performance. Hayes turned to face him. Adequate is not the word I would use, Commander. Captain Chun just demonstrated exceptional marksmanship that exceeds the performance of 95% of qualified snipers at this range. Brennan's smile tightened. With all respect, Colonel, 2,500 meters is a standard distance for advanced snipers. It's the baseline for real long-range work, not the ceiling. His gesture took into range. Any competent shooter with proper training can hit at this distance given ideal conditions and multiple attempts. Chun stepped forward. Commander, you stated yesterday that 1,200 meters wasn't real sniping. You requested this 2,500-meter course specifically. The conditions were available to both of us. Brennan's face darkened. I'm not diminishing your accomplishment, Captain. I'm providing context about what this qualification represents in the broader scope of sniper operations. Morrison cleared his throat. Sir, maybe we should... Not now, Lieutenant. Brennan kept his focus on Chun. Real advanced sniping happens at 3,000 meters and beyond. That's where environmental factors become truly challenging and equipment limitations become apparent. 2,500 meters is impressive, but it's not the peak of the discipline. Hayes stepped between them. Commander Brennan, Captain Chin's performance today was exceptional by any objective measure. The verification team's analysis confirms that. Your commentary is noted, but this qualification stands on its merits. Brennan held her gaze. I'm simply saying that if we want to see what someone is truly capable of, we need to push beyond standard ranges. 3,000 meters would provide genuine data about advanced capability. The range fell silent. Marines and SEALs alike watched the confrontation unfold. Chin spoke quietly. Are you challenging me to a 3,000-meter shot, Commander? Brennan smiled, his confidence returning. I'm suggesting that if you want to demonstrate genuine advanced capability, that's the distance that would prove it. 2,500 is good. 3,000 is exceptional. He spread his hands. But I understand if that's beyond your current skill level. Not everyone can operate at that range. Hayes turned to Chun. Captain, you've completed your qualification successfully. You have nothing to prove beyond what you've already accomplished today. Rodriguez returned from downrange with the target mounted on a board. The 3 impact points were clearly visible, 2 of them nearly touching in the center ring. He set it on the equipment table for documentation photography. Chun looked at the target, then at Brennan, then at Hayes. Colonel, What would be required for an official 3,000-meter attempt? Hayes frowned. Significantly more preparation. Extended range setup. Enhanced verification procedures. Probably multiple days of weather monitoring to find optimal conditions. It's a substantial undertaking. Brennan interjected. But not impossible. If Captain Chen believes she has the capability, the resources could be made available. He glanced at his team. My unit would certainly be interested in observing such an attempt. For educational purposes. Morrison shifted uncomfortably. Sir, perhaps we should discuss this. Brennan silenced him with a look. This is about pushing the boundaries of what's possible, Lieutenant. That's how we advance the discipline. Hey, studied Chun. This is your decision, Captain. You've already accomplished something remarkable today. You don't need to accept additional challenges. Chun was quiet for a long moment. How long would the extended range setup take? Rodriguez checked his tablet. With proper surveying and target placement, probably 2 days minimum. Weather permitting. Chun nodded slowly. Then I'd like to request permission to attempt a 3,000-meter shot, Colonel. Official documentation. Same verification procedures as today. Hayes exhaled. Granted. I'll authorize the range extension and verification team. She fixed Brennan with a hard stare. Commander, since you're so interested in the educational value of this attempt, I trust you and your team will remain available to observe. Brennan smiled. Wouldn't miss it, Colonel. The crowd began dispersing as the official documentation concluded. Marines congratulated Chun as they passed, while the SEAL section departed quietly. Morrison lingered behind his team, looking back at the firing line before following Brennan toward the parking area. Williams approached Chun as she packed her equipment. That was exceptional shooting, Captain. But 3,000 meters is significantly more challenging. The ballistic arc increases exponentially, wind effects multiply, and equipment tolerances become critical factors. Chun secured the Che-Tak in its case. I understand the challenges, Major. He nodded. I'll run the calculations and prepare the ballistic data. If you're serious about this attempt, we should meet tomorrow to review the projections. Chun agreed and finished packing her gear. The range was nearly empty now, just Rodriguez's crew securing equipment and Hayes reviewing documentation with the verification team. The morning sun had climbed high and hot. The target with its 3 precise impacts sat on the table, waiting to be photographed and filed as evidence of what had already been accomplished and what was now promised for 2 days hence. Hayes returned to her office after the range session and pulled Brennan's complete service record from the personnel database. 17 years of service, multiple combat deployments, Silver Star for actions in Ramadi, Bronze Star with Valor device from Syria. The first 12 years showed consistent excellence and leadership. The last 5 years told a different story. She scrolled through formal correspondence, finding 3 official complaints Brennan had filed about integration initiatives. The language was careful, always framed as concerns about operational readiness and training standards rather than direct opposition to inclusion policies. Hayes opened a separate folder containing informal reports. 2 female Marines had requested transfers from joint training rotations after interactions with Brennan. Neither had filed formal complaints, but both had cited uncomfortable working environments. A Navy investigation 2 years prior had examined allegations of hostile climate in Brennan's unit, but found insufficient evidence for disciplinary action. She drafted an email to the SEAL liaison officer at Marine Corps headquarters. The subject line read request for service record review. She detailed the pattern she'd observed and attached documentation from today's range session, including Brennan's escalation from the successful 2,500-meter qualification to demanding a 3,000-meter challenge. Her phone buzzed with a message from Major Williams requesting a meeting about the extended range setup. She replied and checked her schedule, then opened another email from Rodriguez containing the complete verification report from Chen's qualification. 3 hits, 2 center mass, 1 slightly left but well within parameters. The ballistic data showed consistent performance across all 3 shots. Hayes forwarded the report to Marine Corps records with a recommendation for distinguished marksmanship recognition. Then she sat back and considered the situation she'd just authorized. A 3,000-meter shot was exceptional even among elite snipers. The current Marine Corps record stood at 2,300 meters. If Chun succeeded, she would shatter that benchmark by over 700 meters. If she failed publicly after accepting Brennan's challenge, it would validate his narrative about overreaching and inadequate preparation. Hayes picked up her phone and called Chun's quarters. The captain answered on the second ring. "Captain Chun, I want to be clear about what you're attempting. 3,000 meters is beyond the documented capability of most military snipers. The equipment requirements alone present significant challenges." Chen's voice was steady. "I understand, ma'am. I've made shots at extended ranges before." Hayes paused. "Your service record shows 47 confirmed eliminations, but nothing beyond 1,800 meters in official documentation." There was silence on the line before Chen responded. "I have personal documentation from Afghanistan. A shot at 2,847 meters. Confirmed elimination of hostile mortar team. My spotter witnessed it, but we were under fire and never submitted formal paperwork." Hayes pulled up Chen's deployment records. October 2022, Helmand Province, operation in Sanjin District. She found the after-action report mentioning disruption of enemy mortar position, but no details about how it was accomplished. "Can you provide your personal documentation?" "Yes, ma'am. I kept a detailed log with range calculations, weather data, and impact confirmation. Bring it to my office tomorrow morning at 0700. If that shot is documented thoroughly, it changes the context of what we're attempting here." Chun confirmed, and Hayes ended the call. She spent the next hour reviewing ballistic requirements for 3,000-meter shots. The technical challenges were substantial. Bullet drop would exceed 500 feet. Wind drift could push the round several feet off course. The shot would require perfect conditions and flawless execution. Rodriguez met with his range crew in the equipment building to plan the extended range setup. The facility's maximum surveyed distance was 2,700 meters. Extending to 3,000 would require using terrain beyond the established range boundaries. His assistant, Corporal Matthews, pulled up topographical maps on a laptop. "We can use the old impact area past the current range limit. Ground slopes downward, which actually helps with the ballistic trajectory. But we'll need to survey and clear the entire path." "How long for complete setup?" Matthews measured distances on the map. 2 days minimum. 1 day for surveying and target placement. Another day for verification system setup and safety clearance. Whether it needs to be optimal or we delay. Rodriguez approved the timeline. "Start surveying tomorrow at first light. I want 3 independent range confirmations before we place any targets." Chun spent the evening in her quarters with her Afghanistan deployment log open on the desk. The entry from October 14th, 2022 filled 3 pages with detailed calculations and observations. She'd sketched the terrain, noted wind patterns, recorded temperature and humidity. Her spotter's confirmation was written in his handwriting at the bottom of the 3rd page. Impact observed, target eliminated, estimate range 2,800 plus meters. She pulled up mapping software and located the exact position where they'd been set up. Using satellite imagery and coordinate data, she calculated the precise distance to where the mortar team had been positioned. 2,847 meters, accurate within 5 meters. Her phone rang. The caller ID showed her former spotter from that deployment, Sergeant First Class David Park, now stationed at Camp Lejeune. "I heard through the network that you're attempting 3,000 meters at Quantico." Park's voice carried concern. "Is this about that SEAL commander everyone's talking about?" "Word travels fast. Marine Scout sniper community isn't that large." Park paused. "Do you remember Sanjin?" "Every detail. That was the best shooting I've ever witnessed." Park's tone was serious. "But that was combat with everything on the line. This is performance under observation, with politics and careers attached. Different pressure." Chen looked at her deployment log. "I know what I'm capable of. The question is whether I can demonstrate it under controlled conditions." Park was quiet for a moment. "You can. But be aware that Brennan isn't going to accept any result that contradicts his narrative. If you hit at 3,000 meters, he'll demand 3,500. There's no achievement that will satisfy someone committed to proving you don't belong. I understand. Good. Park's voice softened. But for what it's worth, I'll testify about Sanjin if it becomes relevant. That shot was legitimate, and it should have been documented properly. We were too busy staying alive to worry about paperwork. They talked for another 10 minutes about technical preparations before ending the call. Chun returned to her calculations, working through ballistic projections for 3,000 meters with the Chaytak. The numbers were challenging but achievable. Brennan gathered his team in his quarters that evening. Morrison sat apart from the others, his expression troubled. The commander paced as he briefed them on his expectations for the upcoming attempt. 3,000 meters is where the truth comes out. Chin got lucky today with ideal conditions and a friendly verification team. But at 3,000, there's no hiding behind favorable circumstances. The physics become unforgiving. Lieutenant Morrison spoke up. Sir, her shooting today was objectively exceptional. 3 hits at 2,500 meters isn't luck. That's skill. Brennan stopped pacing. You think I don't know that, Lieutenant? He gestured sharply. But exceptional performance at 2,500 doesn't translate automatically to 3,000. The difficulty increases exponentially. Most shooters who can hit at 2,500 will miss at 3,000. Morrison persisted. And if she hits at 3,000? The room went quiet. Brennan's other team members watched him, waiting for his response. Then we acknowledge she got lucky twice. Brennan resumed pacing. Or we examined the verification procedures more carefully. At extreme ranges, there are multiple factors that can create false positives. Target placement, observation angles, documentation protocols. All of it needs scrutiny. Sir, Colonel Hayes is running this by the book. Morrison's voice was steady. 3 independent observers, ballistic analysis, video documentation. If Chun hits at 3,000 meters under those conditions, it's legitimate. Brennan turned on him. Whose side are you on, Lieutenant? I'm on the side of objective assessment. Morrison met his commander's stare. Chun has demonstrated capability that deserves recognition, not rationalization. The other team members shifted uncomfortably. Brennan's face flushed, but he controlled his voice. You're entitled to your opinion, Lieutenant. However, as the senior SEAL representative at this observation, I will be closely monitoring all procedures to ensure the integrity of any claimed achievement. He looked at each team member in turn. We all will be. Morrison said nothing more, but his jaw was tight. After the meeting dispersed, Morrison walked to the base communications center and composed an email to his own chain of command. He detailed the events of the past 2 days, Brennan's escalating challenges, and his concerns about the commander's objectivity. He copied the SEAL liaison officer at headquarters and marked it for immediate attention. Williams worked late in the ballistics lab, running projections for the 3,000-meter shot. The Chaytak's .408 round would be pushed to its effective limit. He calculated bullet drop at 520 feet, wind drift at 3 feet per mile per hour crosswind, flight time approaching 7 seconds. The technical challenges were substantial, but not insurmountable. The military record for a confirmed kill was significantly longer than 3,000 meters, achieved by Canadian snipers in Afghanistan. The question wasn't whether the shot was possible, but whether Chun had the skill to execute it under pressure with single-shot accuracy. His analysis suggested that if she could hit at 2,500 with the precision she demonstrated, 3,000 was within her capability envelope. The key factors would be wind reading and maintaining perfect fundamentals under increased scrutiny. He compiled his report and sent it to Hayes with a copy to Chun. The conclusion was straightforward. Attempt is technically feasible with proper conditions. Success dependent on shooter capability and environmental factors. Recommend postponing if wind exceeds 8 miles per hour. Hayes read the report in her office at 2200 hours. She drafted an email to Chun authorizing 2 days of preparation with full access to Major Williams for ballistic consultation. Then she added a personal note at the bottom. This is your choice to continue or withdraw. Either decision will be supported and respected. There is no shame in acknowledging when a challenge exceeds reasonable risk. She sent the email and closed her laptop. Through her window, the darkened range stretched toward distant hills where tomorrow Rodriguez's crew would begin surveying the path to 3,000 meters. Somewhere in the barracks, multiple people were preparing for an attempt that would resolve nothing if Chen succeeded, because Brennan had already demonstrated his capacity for moving goalposts and rationalizing uncomfortable truths. But it would provide documentation, official and permanent, of exactly who could perform under pressure and who made excuses when performance contradicted their assumptions. Chen arrived at Hayes' office at 06:55, carrying her deployment log in a protective folder. The colonel was already at her desk reviewing overnight communications from Marine Corps headquarters. She gestured for Chen to sit and held out her hand for the log. Hayes spent 15 minutes reading through the entries from October 2022. The detail was meticulous. Wind speed and direction recorded every 10 minutes. Temperature fluctuations, humidity changes, terrain sketches with elevation markers, ballistic calculations written in precise notation. The final entry showed the shot sequence with Chen's observations and her spotter's confirmation. This is thorough documentation, Captain. Hayes closed the log. Why wasn't this submitted through official channels? Chen kept her voice neutral. We were in contact with enemy forces for 6 hours after the shot, ma'am. By the time we returned to base, the incident was buried in a larger operation report. My platoon commander included mention of neutralizing the mortar position, but not the specifics of how it was accomplished. Hayes made notes on her tablet. I'm forwarding this to Marine Corps records with a request for retroactive combat documentation. Sergeant Park's confirmation gives it credibility. She looked up. This changes the assessment of your 3,000-meter attempt. You're not reaching beyond your capability. You're replicating something you've already done under more difficult conditions. Yes, ma'am. Hayes handed the log back. Major Williams has your ballistic data ready. Rodriguez's crew is surveying the extended range today. Weather forecast shows optimal conditions tomorrow morning. She paused. Commander Brennan filed a formal request this morning to be part of the verification team. Chen's expression didn't change. And your decision, ma'am? Denied. Hayes' tone was flat. Verification team members must be impartial observers. Commander Brennan has demonstrated he lacks objectivity in this matter. He'll be permitted to observe like any other personnel, but he will have no role in documentation or assessment. Chen nodded. Thank you, ma'am. After leaving Hayes' office, Chen met Williams in the ballistics lab. He had projection models displayed across 3 monitors, showing bullet trajectories under various wind conditions. At 3,000 meters with the CHATAC, you're looking at a flight time of 6.8 seconds. Williams zoomed in on one trajectory. Bullet drop is 523 feet. Every mile per hour of crosswind will push you approximately 3 feet off target. He pulled up weather data. Tomorrow's forecast shows 4 to 6 mile per hour winds from the southwest, which is manageable. Chun studied the models. What about temperature effects? Williams opened another display. Morning temperature will start around 62 degrees and climb to 75 by mid-morning. The density-altitude change will affect trajectory slightly, maybe 6 inches of variation. He highlighted a section of the graph. Optimal window is 0730 to 0830. After the morning temperature stabilizes, but before thermal effects create excessive shimmer. Chen made notes in her field book, copying the critical data points. What's your assessment of success probability? Williams leaned back in his chair. Based on your performance yesterday and the documentation from Afghanistan, I'd estimate 70% probability of a first-round hit under optimal conditions. That drops to 40% if wind increases above 7 miles per hour. He met her eyes. This is a difficult shot, Captain. Even with your demonstrated skill, there are variables beyond your control. Understood. Chun closed her field book. I'll need access to the range this afternoon for equipment verification. Williams approved it and provided her with updated ballistic card for the 3,000-meter distance. Chen spent the next 2 hours in the armory, conducting detailed inspection of the CHATAC and running function checks on every component. Rodriguez supervised the surveying crew as they marked the 3,000-meter line across terrain that hadn't been used for live fire in over a decade. Corporal Matthews used a laser rangefinder with GPS integration to verify the distance from 3 separate positions. First measurement, 3,000.2 meters. Matthews recorded the data. Second measurement, 2,998.7 meters. Third measurement, 3,000.4 meters. He calculated the average. Mean distance, 3,000.1 meters, within acceptable tolerance. Rodriguez examined the terrain through binoculars. The ground sloped gradually downward from the firing line, which would help with the ballistic arc. They need to clear brush and verify there were no obstructions in the bullet path. Set up the target stand at 3,000 meters exactly. We'll confirm with final survey tomorrow morning before the attempt. The crew spent the afternoon clearing vegetation and preparing the target area. By 1600 hours, they had a steel silhouette mounted on reinforced stands with high-visibility markers for the verification team's spotting scopes. Brennan received Hayes's denial of his verification team request at 1300 hours. He read the email twice, his anger building with each word. The reasoning was clear. Verification team members must maintain objectivity, and his previous statements demonstrated bias. He called Morrison into his office. The colonel is stacking the verification team against us. Morrison remained standing. Sir, Colonel Hayes selected 3 senior snipers with extensive combat experience. The same team that verified yesterday's qualification. That's standard protocol. Brennan stood and walked to his window overlooking the range. They're protecting Chun because she fits the narrative they want. Female Marine breaks records, proves the skeptics wrong, validates the integration policies. He turned to face Morrison. But nobody's asking whether those policies compromise operational effectiveness. Sir, with respect, Captain Chen's performance demonstrates operational effectiveness. Morrison's voice was careful. 3 hits at 2,500 meters, documented Afghanistan elimination at 2,800 meters. Those are objective measures of capability. Brennan's expression hardened. You've been very vocal about defending Chun, Lieutenant. I'm beginning to question your judgment on this matter. I'm defending objective assessment over narrative-driven evaluation. Morrison held his ground. That's what you taught me when I joined this team. Let the performance speak for itself. The room was silent for a long moment. Brennan finally spoke, his voice cold. You're dismissed, Lieutenant. We'll observe tomorrow's attempt and conduct our own assessment of the verification procedures. If there are irregularities, we'll document them and submit our findings through appropriate channels. Morrison left without another word. He returned to his quarters and added to the report he'd been compiling. Brennan's refusal to accept documented performance was becoming concerning. Morrison had served under this commander for 3 years and respected his combat leadership, but the current situation revealed a blind spot that compromised objectivity. He sent an updated report to the SEAL liaison officer with a copy to his own chain of command. Then he composed a separate email to the 2 SEAL team members who'd be observing tomorrow, cautioning them to maintain independence from Brennan's influence during their assessments. Chin spent the evening at the range conducting dry fire practice with the Chetak. She'd set up at the firing line with Rodriguez's permission, practicing her shooting position and trigger control without live ammunition. The routine helped cement muscle memory and calm her mind. Rodriguez watched from the tower for a while before climbing down to join her. How are you feeling about tomorrow, Captain? Chun continued her breathing drill. Confident in my preparation. Aware of the variables I can't control. Rodriguez nodded. I've been range master for 33 years. Never seen anyone attempt 3,000 meters on this facility. The Canadian record is longer, but that was combat in Afghanistan, not a control qualification. I've read the reports on that shot. Chun safed the rifle and sat up. 3,540 meters, confirmed by multiple witnesses. The shooter had 12 years of experience and perfect conditions. You have combat experience at extended range, too. Rodriguez gestured at the darkening range. Tomorrow will be different pressure, though. Combat shots are about survival. Qualification shots are about proof. Chun was quiet for a moment. In Afghanistan, I took that shot because if I didn't, 3 Marines would die from that mortar position. Tomorrow I'm taking this shot because a SEAL commander doesn't think I belong here. She looked at Rodriguez. The pressure is different, but the fundamentals are the same. Rodriguez smiled. Good answer, Captain. He stood to leave. Range will be ready at 0700. Verification team assembles at 0715. Weather window opens at 0730. After Rodriguez left, Chen remained at the firing line as darkness settled over the range. 3,000 meters downrange, invisible in the evening shadows, the target waited. She visualized the shot sequence: position, breathing, sight picture, trigger press. 6.8 seconds of flight time. 523 feet of bullet drop. Wind drift calculated and compensated. She'd made harder shots under worse conditions when lives depended on it. Tomorrow was simply documentation of capability she'd already proven to herself and her spotter on a compound roof in Helmand Province. Hayes worked late reviewing the final preparations. Rodriguez had submitted his range survey confirming 3,000.1 meters, within acceptable tolerance. Williams had provided weather predictions showing optimal conditions. The verification team was briefed and ready. Marine Corps videography would document everything. She'd received responses to her morning emails. The SEAL liaison officer acknowledged her concerns about Brennan and indicated that SEAL Command was conducting their own review of his recent conduct. Marine Corps records confirmed they'd received her recommendation for Chen's distinguished marksmanship recognition and were processing the retroactive documentation for the Afghanistan shot. Morrison's reports had also reached her desk through command channels. His observations about Brennan's deteriorating objectivity aligned with her own assessment. The situation had moved beyond a simple challenge between two service members. It had become a test case for how the military documented and recognized capability regardless of whether that capability matched someone's preconceptions. Hayes drafted her final authorization for tomorrow's attempt. She specified the verification procedures, documentation requirements, and observation protocols. Brennan would be permitted to watch, but would have no input into the official assessment. The measurement would stand on its own merits, witnessed by impartial observers and recorded by multiple systems. She sent the authorization and closed her office. Tomorrow would resolve the immediate question of whether Chun could hit at 3,000 meters. But Hayes understood that no single shot would resolve the larger question of why some people needed repeated proof of capability that they accepted without question from others. The range was silent under starlight, the path to 3,000 meters marked by surveyor stakes, and the distant target that would either ring with impact or remain untouched, transforming data into documentation and performance into permanent record. Chen woke at 0400 and began her pre-shot routine. She dressed in her field uniform, ate a light breakfast of oatmeal and fruit, then reviewed her ballistic cards one final time. The calculations were memorized, but the ritual of checking them focused her mind. She received a text message at 0530 from Sergeant Park. "You've got this. Show them what Sanjin-level shooting looks like." She replied with a simple acknowledgement and continued her preparation. The range was already active when she arrived at 0645. Rodriguez's crew had been on site since dawn, conducting final verification of the target placement and camera systems. Williams was setting up his meteorological equipment at both the firing line and downrange observation point. Hayes arrived at 0650 with the verification team. The three senior snipers moved to their designated observation positions, setting up spotting scopes with range-finding capabilities. Each position had clear line of sight to the 3,000-meter target and independent recording equipment. Rodriguez approached Chun at the equipment table. Final survey confirms 3,000 meters exactly. Wind is currently 4.3 miles per hour from the southwest. Temperature 64 degrees and rising. He checked his tablet. Conditions are optimal and forecast to remain stable through 0900. She nodded and began unpacking the Chetak. Her hands moved through the assembly sequence with practiced efficiency, checking each component as she built the rifle from its case. The scope was already zeroed from her previous session, but she verified the mounting screws and reticle alignment. The crowd began gathering before 0700. Marines arrived in groups, taking positions along the observation berm. SEAL personnel came separately, including Brennan and his team. Morrison positioned himself apart from the main SEAL group, his expression neutral as he set up his own spotting scope. By 07:15, over 60 personnel had assembled. The atmosphere was different from the previous qualification. The earlier session had carried competitive energy and curiosity. This gathering felt heavier, weighted with significance beyond a simple marksmanship demonstration. Williams completed his final weather check and approached Hayes with his report. Conditions are ideal, Colonel. Wind steady at 4.5 miles per hour, temperature 66 degrees, humidity 48%. Visibility is excellent with minimal heat shimmer. If we're going to attempt this shot, now is the optimal window. Hayes walked to the firing line where Chun was conducting her final equipment inspection. Captain, you understand that this attempt is voluntary. You've already demonstrated exceptional capability at 2,500 meters. You have nothing left to prove. Chun loaded a single round into the Chaytax magazine. Respectfully, ma'am, I have this shot to prove. Hayes studied her for a moment, then nodded. The range is yours, Captain. Rodriguez climbed the observation tower and keyed his microphone. This is an official qualification attempt at 3,000 meters. Verification team is in position. All recording systems are active. He paused, letting the announcement settle over the assembled observers. This distance exceeds current Marine Corps records and represents advanced marksmanship capability. Single shot attempt, full documentation. The range fell completely silent. 60 people stood motionless, watching Chin assume her shooting position behind the Chaytac. She settled on her mat with deliberate slowness, adjusting the bipod height and checking her sight picture. Brennan stood with his arms crossed at the front of the SEAL section. His expression was locked in skeptical assessment, but his jaw was tight with tension. The other SEALs around him maintained silence, their attention fixed on the firing line. Morrison watched through his spotting scope, already focused on the distant target. He'd ranged it independently and confirmed 3,000 meters. The steel silhouette was barely visible even through magnified optics, a dark shape against brown terrain. Chin cycled through her breathing pattern, bringing her heart rate down into the controlled zone. 6.8 seconds of flight time meant she'd be holding her position longer than any previous shot, maintaining perfect form while the round traveled nearly 2 miles. Williams monitored his instruments and provided final data to Rodriguez. Wind holding at 4.6 miles per hour, temperature 67 degrees. Atmospheric pressure steady. All conditions optimal. Hayes stood beside the verification team's primary observer, Master Gunnery Sergeant Chun, who had 32 years of sniper experience, including 4 combat deployments. He was watching the target through a high-powered spotting scope mounted on a tripod with ballistic computer integration. Rodriguez announced into his microphone, "Range is going hot. Shooter may fire when ready." Chun found her natural respiratory pause and held it. Her sight picture was clear despite the distance. The target centered in her reticle with her windage adjustment calculated for 4.6 miles per hour of crosswind. She'd added the elevation compensation for 523 feet of drop. The world narrowed to her scope view and the pressure of her finger against the trigger. She pressed through the brake with steady control. The Chaytac fired and Chun rode the recoil, maintaining her position to observe impact. The round left the barrel at 2,800 feet per second, beginning its long arc downrange. The verification team tracked the bullet's trajectory through their spotting scopes. 6.8 seconds felt infinite, stretched by tension and significance. The assembled observers were frozen, many holding their breath without realizing it. Morrison kept his scope centered on the target, watching for impact. His experience told him the shot was technically sound. Chin's form had been textbook perfect, her fundamentals flawless. Brennan stared downrange with his naked eye, unable to see the target at this distance, but unwilling to use optics that would require him to look away from the firing line. The bullet completed its arc. 3,000 meters from where Chun lay motionless, the round struck the steel silhouette with a resonant clang that echoed across the range. Master Gunnery Sergeant Chun spoke immediately into his radio. Impact confirmed, center mass. Deviation approximately 0.4 meters left of center. Solid hit within scoring parameters. The second verification observer confirmed. Impact observed left of center within qualification zone. The third observer added his assessment. Center mass impact confirmed, high-quality shot. The Marines section erupted. Cheers and applause rolled across the range. Marines shouting congratulations and approval. Several personnel jumped and pumped their fists, the celebration spontaneous and overwhelming. The SEALs section remained quiet, but several members were nodding with visible respect. Morrison lowered his spotting scope and smiled, then began applauding. Two other SEALs joined him, their clapping deliberate and measured. Brennan stood motionless, his face flushed. He stared downrange at the target he couldn't see, his hands clenched at his sides. Hayes walked to the firing line as Chun saved her rifle and stood. She extended her hand. 3,000 meters, Captain. That's going to stand as the Marine Corps record. Chun shook her hand, her expression showing satisfaction but remaining controlled. Thank you, ma'am. Rodriguez climbed down from the tower. I need to retrieve the target for documentation. He looked at Chun. That was the best shooting I've seen in 33 years, Captain. Not just the distance, but the pressure you handled. This qualification will be discussed in sniper schools for decades. Williams approached with his ballistic data. The trajectory matched projections within 2% variance. Wind compensation was nearly perfect. He pulled up video footage on his tablet showing the shot sequence. Your fundamentals were flawless throughout the entire 6.8 seconds of flight time. This is textbook advanced marksmanship. The Marine Corps videography team moved in to interview Chun while Rodriguez's crew headed downrange to retrieve the target. The celebration continued among the Marine observers, several of whom were taking photos and recording video on their phones. Morrison walked toward the firing line, separating himself from the SEAL section. He waited until the immediate congratulations subsided before approaching Chun. Captain, that was exceptional shooting. He extended his hand. I wanted to personally acknowledge your achievement. Chun shook his hand. Thank you, Lieutenant. Morrison glanced back at where Brennan stood, surrounded by his team. For what it's worth, not everyone in the SEAL community shares Commander Brennan's perspective. There are plenty of us who recognize capability when we see it demonstrated. I appreciate that. Morrison nodded and returned to his position, deliberately walking past Brennan without stopping to join his group. Brennan watched the exchange, his jaw working. He turned to the SEALs around him. Let's review the verification footage. I want to examine the camera angles and confirm the target placement was accurate. His team exchanged glances but followed him toward the operations building. Hayes observed Brennan's departure and made a note on her tablet. She'd expected this response. The documentation was thorough and the verification team was beyond reproach, but she knew Brennan would search for procedural issues rather than accept the result. Rodriguez returned from downrange, carrying the target board. The impact point was clearly visible, a deformed strike slightly left of the center ring. He set it on the equipment table and began the photography documentation while the verification team recorded measurements. The crowd slowly dispersed, Marines stopping to congratulate Chun as they passed. Several asked for photos, which she accommodated with patient professionalism. The SEAL observers left in small groups, most heading toward the parking area rather than lingering. Williams completed his ballistic analysis report and transmitted it to Hayes and Marine Corps records. The conclusion was unambiguous. Qualification successful at 3,000 meters with first round hit. Performance exceeds existing Marine Corps records by 700 meters. Recommend immediate recognition for distinguished marksmanship achievement. Hayes read the report on her tablet and approved it for official submission. Then she called Chun over to the equipment table. Captain, this shot will be formally submitted to Marine Corps records. Based on the verification team's assessment and Major Williams's analysis, I'm recommending you for the Marine Corps Distinguished Marksman Badge." She paused. This is a significant achievement that reflects not just today's performance, but your overall capability as a sniper. Chun stood at attention. "Thank you, ma'am." I'm honored. Hayes relaxed slightly. "You should also know that your Afghanistan documentation has been processed. The shot at 2,847 meters is now officially recognized in your service record." Sergeant Park's testimony was accepted as valid verification. Chen's controlled expression cracked slightly, showing genuine emotion. "That means a great deal, ma'am. You earned both recognitions through demonstrated performance." Hayes closed her tablet. Now the real work begins. This accomplishment is going to draw significant attention. Are you prepared for that? "Yes, ma'am." "Good." Hayes gestured toward the range. "Go secure your equipment. We'll have a formal debrief at 1300 hours in my office." Chen returned to the firing line and began breaking down the CHATAC. The range was nearly empty now, just Rodriguez's crew finishing their documentation and Williams packing his meteorological equipment. The morning sun had climbed higher, warming the air and creating the heat shimmer that would have made the shot significantly more difficult an hour later. She'd made the shot with 30 minutes to spare in the optimal weather window. The bullet had flown true across 3,000 meters, proving capability that shouldn't have required proving, but now stood as permanent documentation in official military records. The target with its single precise impact would be photographed, measured, and filed as evidence of what was possible when skill met preparation and pressure became simply another variable to control through disciplined fundamentals. Brennan spent 2 hours in the operations building, reviewing every frame of the verification footage. His team stood behind him as he examined camera angles, target placement measurements, and ballistic data. He made notes on his tablet, circling timestamps and highlighting discrepancies he claimed to identify. The target was surveyed at 3,000.1 meters, not exactly 3,000. He zoomed in on the survey data. That's a 0.03% deviation from stated distance. One of his team members, Petty Officer Chun, spoke carefully. "Sir, that's within standard surveying tolerance." The range was documented by 3 independent measurements. Brennan ignored him and pulled up the wind data. Williams recorded wind at 4.6 miles per hour at the firing line, but we don't have continuous wind measurement at every point along the bullet path. Conditions could have been more favorable mid-flight. Lieutenant Morrison had been silent until now. "Sir, the verification procedures were identical to those used for every qualification on this range for the past decade. The documentation is thorough and the result is legitimate." Brennan turned to face him. "Your job, Lieutenant, is to support your commander's assessment, not contradict it at every opportunity. My job is to provide honest evaluation." Morrison held his ground. Captain Chun made a legitimate shot under properly documented conditions. 3 independent observers confirmed impact. The ballistic analysis validates her performance. There's nothing in this data that suggests irregularity. The room was silent. Brennan's other team members looked away, unwilling to meet Morrison's eyes or support his position openly. Brennan saved his notes and closed the laptop. "I'm submitting a formal query to Colonel Hayes requesting clarification on verification procedures and asking for independent review of the survey data." He looked at each team member. "We have a responsibility to maintain standards, even when that makes us unpopular." Morrison shook his head slightly, but said nothing more. The team filed out of the operations building, their unity fractured by the growing division over Brennan's response. Hayes received Brennan's formal query at 1100 hours. She read through his questions about survey tolerance, wind measurement continuity, and verification team independence. The tone was carefully professional, but the intent was transparent. Create enough procedural doubt to undermine Chen's achievement. She drafted a detailed response addressing each point. The survey tolerance was standard and well within acceptable parameters for military ranges. Wind measurements were taken at both firing line and target location with interpolation based on established meteorological models. The verification team consisted of 3 senior snipers with no prior relationship to Captain Chun and extensive experience in combat marksmanship assessment. Hayes concluded her response with a direct statement. Captain Chin's qualification at 3,000 meters meets all requirements for official recognition and will be submitted to Marine Corps records as documented. The verification procedures were thorough, professional, and beyond reproach. She sent the response and immediately forwarded Brennan's query to the SEAL liaison officer with a cover note detailing the pattern of challenges and rationalization she'd observed over the past 3 days. Chun attended the formal debrief in Hayes' office at 1300 hours. Rodriguez and Williams were present, along with Master Gunnery Sergeant Chun from the verification team. Hayes opened the session. Captain Chun, your performance over the past 3 days has been exceptional. The verification team has submitted unanimous recommendation for distinguished marksmanship recognition. She pulled up documentation on her computer. Your 3,000-meter qualification will be submitted to Marine Corps records today. Pending review, you'll be the longest-range qualification shot in Marine Corps history. Williams added his assessment. The ballistic analysis shows textbook execution. Your wind reading was within 0.2 miles per hour of optimal. Your elevation compensation was exact, and your shooting fundamentals were flawless under significant pressure. Master Gunnery Sergeant Chin spoke next. I've been evaluating snipers for 3 decades. That 3,000-meter shot was the best single performance I've witnessed. The technical difficulty combined with the pressure of documentation and observation would break most shooters. You handled it with complete professionalism. Rodriguez contributed his perspective. I've documented thousands of qualifications on this range. What you accomplished in 3 days, moving from 1,200 to 2,500 to 3,000 meters under escalating pressure, represents exceptional capability and mental toughness. Hayes continued. You should also know that Commander Brennan has submitted a formal query questioning verification procedures. She handed Chin a copy of the query and her response. I want you aware of his continued efforts to undermine your achievement. However, the documentation stands on its merits, and his objections have no procedural basis. Chin read through the documents. Her expression remained neutral. I understand, ma'am. Hayes closed that topic and moved forward. Marine Corps Sniper School has submitted a request for you to serve as guest instructor for their advanced course. The request specifically mentions extreme-range shooting instruction based on your demonstrated capability. She looked at Chin directly. This would be a significant professional opportunity. What would the assignment entail? A 3-month rotation starting next month. You'd be teaching advanced students who've already completed basic sniper qualification. The focus would be on extended range techniques, ballistic calculation, and performance under pressure. Rodriguez would be your co-instructor for the first month to help with curriculum development. Chun considered the offer. I'm honored by the request, ma'am. I'd like to accept. Hayes approved it immediately. I'll inform Sniper School Command. This will formalize your expertise and give you platform to influence the next generation of Marine snipers. She made notes on her tablet. You're also being considered for a promotion board ahead of your normal cycle. Your performance here, combined with your combat record, makes you a strong candidate for Major. The meeting continued for another 30 minutes, covering administrative details and timeline for the various recognitions and assignments. When it concluded, Chun left Hayes' office with official documentation of her qualifications and the instructor assignment orders. Morrison found Chun in the armory that afternoon while she was returning the Chaitak to the weapons vault. He waited until the armory specialist had secured the rifle before approaching her. Captain, I want to speak with you privately. Morrison's expression was serious. I've submitted multiple reports to SEAL Command documenting Commander Brennan's conduct over the past several days. His behavior has been unprofessional, and his refusal to accept objective performance measures is concerning. Chin listened without interrupting. I want you to know that many SEALs respect what you've accomplished. Morrison continued. Brennan doesn't represent the majority view. Most of us evaluate capability based on demonstrated performance, not preconceptions about who belongs in certain roles. I appreciate you telling me that, Lieutenant. Morrison hesitated before continuing. Brennan is escalating his challenges because accepting your capability would require him to reassess fundamental assumptions he's built his identity around. That's not your responsibility to fix, but I wanted you aware that his response is about his limitations, not yours. Chen acknowledged the observation. What will SEAL Command do with your reports? Morrison shrugged slightly. Honestly, I don't know. Brennan has strong political connections and an exemplary combat record, but his pattern of behavior toward integration initiatives is documented now, and this incident provides concrete evidence of how that pattern manifests. He paused. At minimum, he'll likely be removed from joint training rotations. They talked for a few more minutes before Morrison excused himself. Chun finished her equipment accountability and walked back to her quarters, processing the events of the past 3 days. She'd proven capability at 1,200 meters, 2,500 meters, and 3,000 meters. She'd provided documentation of a combat shot at 2,847 meters. She'd received unanimous verification team support and formal recognition recommendations from senior leadership. And Brennan was still searching for procedural irregularities to justify his initial dismissal of her presence on the range. That evening, Hayes received a call from the SEAL liaison officer at Marine Corps headquarters. The conversation lasted 40 minutes and covered Morrison's reports, Brennan's pattern of complaints, and the events of the past 3 days at Quantico. The liaison officer was direct. Commander Brennan will be reassigned to administrative duties at SEAL headquarters effective immediately. He's being removed from all training cadre positions pending a review of his conduct. The review will examine his pattern of complaints and his response to integration initiatives over the past several years. Hayes listened and took notes. What about Lieutenant Morrison? He'll be commended for his professional conduct and accurate reporting. The liaison officer paused. Morrison demonstrated exactly the kind of leadership we want to see. He evaluated performance objectively and reported concerns through appropriate channels. That's textbook officer conduct. Hayes agreed and provided her own assessment of Morrison's behavior during the observation periods. After the call ended, she drafted an email to Chun informing her of Brennan's reassignment, though she kept the details vague pending official announcement. Brennan received his reassignment orders at 1800 hours. He read them twice, his anger building with each word. Administrative duties at SEAL headquarters, removed from training cadre, pending conduct review. The language was professional, but the message was clear. His career trajectory had been altered significantly. He called his team together that evening. Morrison was notably absent, having declined to attend after receiving his own communication from SEAL Command. Brennan addressed the remaining team members. This is political retaliation for questioning procedures and maintaining standards. His voice was tight with frustration. We did nothing wrong by examining the documentation and asking for clarification. That's our responsibility as professionals. His team members exchanged glances but offered no response. The silence stretched uncomfortably. Petty Officer Chen finally spoke. Sir, with respect, Captain Chun made legitimate shots under proper documentation. The verification was thorough. Maybe it's time to accept that she earned her qualification. Brennan's face flushed. You're all dismissed. He turned away, unable to maintain the pretense of unit cohesion that had already fractured beyond repair. After his team departed, Brennan sat alone in his quarters reviewing his service record. 17 years of exemplary performance, multiple combat decorations, leadership positions in elite units. Now reassigned to administrative duties because he'd maintained standards and questioned procedures that seemed designed to produce predetermined outcomes. He couldn't see that the procedures had been neutral and his interpretation had been compromised by assumptions he refused to examine. He couldn't acknowledge that Chen's performance had been objectively exceptional by any measure. He could only frame his reassignment as persecution rather than consequence. The base was quiet that night. Chen reviewed her instructor assignment materials and began drafting curriculum ideas for the extreme range course. Rodriguez filed his final documentation on the 3,000-meter qualification. Williams completed his ballistic analysis report and submitted it through official channels. Hayes worked late organizing the formal recognition package for Chen's submission to Marine Corps records. The documentation was comprehensive: verification team statements, ballistic analysis, video footage, survey data, witness accounts from over 60 observers. The package also included the retroactive recognition for Chen's Afghanistan shot, now officially documented with Sergeant Park's testimony and supported by her detailed deployment log. 2 shots separated by 3 years and vastly different circumstances, connected by the same fundamental truth. Capability existed independent of whether someone chose to recognize it, and documentation transformed performance in a permanent record that survived beyond any individual's resistance to uncomfortable evidence. The official announcement came through command channels 3 days after the 3,000-meter qualification. Chen was conducting equipment maintenance in the armory when Rodriguez found her with a printout of the Marine Corps records decision. "It's official, Captain." Rodriguez handed her the document. Marine Corps record for longest confirmed qualification shot, 3,000 meters. Your name, your achievement, permanent record. Chen read through the formal recognition. The language was precise and comprehensive, detailing the verification procedures, ballistic analysis, and witness documentation. At the bottom was a secondary notation about her Afghanistan shot at 2,847 meters, now officially recognized as a combat action worthy of record. Rodriguez smiled. "You're also being awarded the Marine Corps Distinguished Marksman Badge. Ceremony is scheduled for next Friday, with Colonel Hayes presiding." He paused. "And Marine Corps Times is sending a reporter to interview you about the record. This is going to be bigger than just Quantico." Chen acknowledged the information and returned to her equipment maintenance. The recognition was satisfying, but the real validation had been the shot itself. The moment when the bullet struck center mass after 6.8 seconds of flight and proved capability that shouldn't have needed proving. Hayes assembled a briefing package for Marine Corps leadership, documenting the entire sequence of events. She included Chen's qualifications at all 3 distances, the verification team reports, Brennan's escalating challenges, Morrison's professional conduct reports, and the final reassignment decision. The package went to 3-star level at Marine Corps headquarters with a cover memo Hayes spent 2 hours crafting. The memo addressed not just Chen's achievement, but the institutional response to capability that challenged preconceptions. She wrote about the importance of objective assessment, the danger of allowing bias to influence professional evaluation, and the need for leadership to recognize and address patterns of discrimination even when carefully disguised as concerns about standards. The memo concluded with a recommendation. Use this case as training material for senior leadership courses on maintaining objectivity in personnel assessment and creating environments where capability is evaluated on merit rather than filtered through assumptions about who belongs in certain roles. Hayes sent the package and received acknowledgement from the Deputy Commandant's office within 2 hours. The response indicated that the case was already drawing significant attention at senior levels and would indeed be incorporated into leadership training curricula. Morrison received official commendation from SEAL Command for his professional conduct and accurate reporting. The commendation letter specifically praised his willingness to document concerns about a superior officer's behavior when that behavior contradicted SEAL values of objective assessment and meritocratic evaluation. He was also informed that he'd be assuming command of his team effective immediately. Brennan's reassignment created a leadership vacancy, and Morrison's handling of the situation demonstrated command potential. The promotion was ahead of his normal timeline, but reflected SEAL Command's confidence in his judgment. Morrison called Chun to share the news. "I wanted you to know that my team will be participating in joint training exercises next quarter. We'd like to request integration with your advanced marksmanship instruction, if that's possible." Chun appreciated the gesture. "I'll coordinate with Sniper School Command. Having SEAL participation would strengthen the course." Morrison agreed, and they discussed potential training scenarios before ending the call. The conversation was professional and forward-looking, focused on building capability rather than dwelling on the conflict that had preceded this moment. Brennan reported to SEAL headquarters in Virginia Beach for his new administrative assignment. The position was technically lateral in rank, but represented significant reduction in responsibility and influence. He'd gone from leading an operational team and serving on training cadres to managing logistics documentation and equipment inventory reports. His first day consisted of processing paperwork and attending briefings about supply chain management. The work was necessary, but removed from the operational environment where he'd built his reputation. His new supervisor was a commander who'd never served in combat, but had extensive experience in acquisition and logistics. During a break between briefings, Brennan checked his personal email and found messages from several colleagues in the SEAL community. Most offered sympathy and suggested he'd been treated unfairly. A few were more direct, questioning why he'd pushed the situation with Chun rather than accepting her qualification results. One email from former teammate was particularly blunt. "You let your ego override your judgment." She made 3 legitimate shots under proper documentation. You should have congratulated her and moved on. Instead, you created a situation that forced command to choose between supporting documented capability and protecting someone who couldn't accept being wrong. They made the right choice. Brennan deleted that email and focused on the ones that validated his perspective. But the words stayed with him, challenging the narrative he'd constructed about persecution and political correctness undermining standards. Chun began her instructor assignment at Marine Corps Sniper School 2 weeks after the record qualification. Her first class consisted of 12 Marines who'd completed basic sniper training and were selected for advanced instruction. 3 SEAL students were integrated into the class as part of Morrison's Joint Training Initiative. She spent the first day covering the fundamentals of extreme-range shooting, ballistic calculation at extended distances, environmental factor assessment, equipment selection and maintenance, and the mental discipline required to maintain perfect form during long-shot sequences. On the second day, she took the class to the range for practical application. They started at 1,500 meters, a distance where most of the students were already competent. Then she moved them progressively farther, 1,800 meters, 2,100 meters, 2,400 meters. By the end of the first week, 3 students had successfully qualified at 2,500 meters. By the end of the second week, 1 Marine and 1 SEAL had made successful shots at 2,700 meters. Rodriguez assisted with the instruction, providing his 3 decades of experience to help students understand the progression from competent marksmanship to exceptional performance. He watched Chun teach and recognized the same qualities he'd observed during her own qualifications. Technical precision combined with patience, high standards balanced with encouragement, and absolute focus on objective assessment of each student's demonstrated capability. The Marine Corps Times interview was published in the 3rd week of Chen's instructor assignment. The article detailed her record-breaking qualification, included quotes from the verification team about the technical difficulty of the shot, and provided context about her combat record, including the newly documented Afghanistan engagement. The article also mentioned, briefly and without sensationalizing, the challenges she'd faced from Commander Brennan and his subsequent reassignment. The reporter had interviewed Hayes, Rodriguez, and Morrison, all of whom provided professional assessments of the situation without attacking Brennan personally. The article concluded with Chen's own perspective. Capability is demonstrated through performance, not claimed through credentials. I was fortunate to have the opportunity to show what I could do under proper documentation. That's all any service member asks for, a fair chance to prove their worth through objective assessment. The article was picked up by several military news outlets and generated significant discussion in professional forums. The overwhelming response was positive, with military personnel from all services commenting about the importance of merit-based evaluation and the dangers of allowing bias to influence professional assessment. A smaller, but vocal minority criticized what they characterized as lowered standards and political pressure influencing military decisions. These comments echoed Brennan's arguments about integration initiatives compromising operational effectiveness. Hayes monitored the discussion and noted the pattern. The critics consistently focused on abstract concerns about standards while ignoring the specific documented performance that contradicted their assumptions. They defended Brennan's right to question procedures while dismissing Chen's verified achievement as somehow less legitimate than identical achievements by male shooters. The pattern was instructive, and Hayes incorporated it into a presentation she was developing for a senior leadership conference about recognizing and addressing unconscious bias in personnel evaluation. Chen's class graduated 6 students with advanced qualifications at 2,500 meters or beyond. The graduation ceremony included demonstration shoots where each graduate made their qualifying shots under observation from sniper school leadership and visiting officers from other units. Morrison attended with 3 members of his team, watching as the SEAL student from their unit successfully qualified at 2,600 meters. After the ceremony, Morrison approached Chen. "Your instruction made a measurable difference in our capabilities." The SEAL student handed Chen a unit coin. "Our team wants you to have this as recognition of your contribution to our operational readiness." Chen accepted the coin, understanding the significance of the gesture. "Thank you, Lieutenant Commander." The rank change registered, reflecting Morrison's recent promotion. "Congratulations on your advancement." Morrison smiled. "I learned from watching you handle pressure with professionalism. That's worth more than any tactical instruction." They talked briefly about future joint training opportunities before Morrison departed with his team. The interaction was observed by several sniper school instructors who'd witnessed the entire progression from Brennan's initial challenges through Chen's record qualification to this moment of professional cooperation between services. Rodriguez approached Chen after the ceremony concluded. "You've accomplished something beyond a shooting record. You've demonstrated how to respond to unjustified challenges with performance rather than argument." He gestured at the departing students. Those 12 shooters learned technical skills, but they also learned something more valuable. They learned that capability transcends politics when you document it thoroughly enough that denial becomes impossible. Chen helped Rodriguez secure the range equipment. The day was cooling into evening. The Quantico range is quiet after the graduation activity. She thought about the progression from that first morning when Brennan had called her a diversity hire through the escalating challenges to this moment where her instruction was improving operational capability across multiple units. The record would stand in official documentation. The Distinguished Marksman Badge would be presented at next week's ceremony. The instructor assignment would continue for another 2 months. The Marine Corps Times article would be archived and referenced in future discussions about merit-based evaluation. But the real achievement was simpler than any of that recognition. She'd been given the opportunity to demonstrate capability, she'd executed under proper documentation, and the institutional response had been to accept objective evidence rather than accommodate bias. That acceptance had required leadership from Hayes, professional courage from Morrison, and detailed documentation from Rodriguez and Williams. It had required an institutional commitment to evidence-based decision-making even when that evidence contradicted comfortable assumptions held by respected officers. The system had worked imperfectly and only after significant pressure, but it had ultimately functioned as designed. Capability had been documented, performance had been recognized, bias had been addressed through reassignment, and standards had been maintained through objective assessment rather than subjective gatekeeping. Chen secured the last piece of equipment and walked with Rodriguez toward the parking area. The ranges stretched behind them, the targets at various distances standing silent witness to the qualifications that had transformed abstract capability into documented achievement and personal vindication into institutional precedent. The SEAL Command investigation into Brennan's conduct concluded 6 weeks after his reassignment. The investigating officer was a captain with 23 years of service who'd served with Brennan in Iraq and maintained professional respect for his combat record. That respect made the investigation's findings more significant. The report documented 7 formal complaints Brennan had filed about integration initiatives over 4 years. Each complaint had been carefully worded to focus on operational readiness and training standards, but the pattern was undeniable. Every complaint targeted situations involving female service members or diversity policies. The report also documented conversations with 4 female Marines and 2 female Navy personnel who'd served in training rotations under Brennan's observation. None had filed formal complaints, but all described environments where their competence was questioned before they demonstrated capability, where their achievements were attributed to favorable conditions rather than skill, and where they felt unwelcome despite meeting objective standards. Morrison's reports provided contemporary documentation of how this pattern manifested during the Chin situation. The investigating officer noted that Morrison's detailed observations showed Brennan's escalating challenges, his refusal to accept documented results, and his search for procedural irregularities when confronted with performance that contradicted his assumptions. The conclusion was direct. Commander Brennan's pattern of conduct toward integration initiatives and female service members demonstrated bias that compromised his effectiveness in training and evaluation roles. While his combat record remained exemplary, his inability to objectively assess capability when it contradicted his preconceptions made him unsuitable for positions involving personnel development or joint training operations. The recommendation was equally clear: permanent removal from all training cadre positions, mandatory counseling on unconscious bias, and assignment to roles where his technical expertise could be utilized without personnel evaluation responsibilities. No reduction in rank, no formal reprimand, but a career trajectory permanently altered. SEAL Command approved the recommendations. Brennan received the investigation results along with notification of his permanent assignment to logistics and acquisition roles. The notification included an offer: complete the bias counseling program and demonstrate change perspective, and future training assignments might be reconsidered. Refuse the counseling, and the administrative assignment would be permanent. Brennan read the investigation report in his headquarters office. The documentation was thorough, and the conclusions were supported by evidence he couldn't refute. Multiple witnesses detailed observations, his own written complaints, and recorded statements during the Chin qualifications. He saw himself described as an officer whose combat excellence had been undermined by inability to adapt to changing military demographics. The report acknowledged his legitimate concerns about maintaining standards, while concluding that his expression of those concerns consistently targeted integration rather than actual performance shortfalls. The most difficult section to read was Morrison's detailed account of the 3-day period at Quantico. His former subordinate had documented every escalation, every rationalization, every refusal to accept objective evidence. Morrison's assessment was clinical and damning. Commander Brennan's responses to Captain Chin's qualifications demonstrated pattern consistent with bias rather than legitimate standards enforcement. Brennan set the report aside and stared at his computer screen, showing equipment inventory spreadsheets. He'd spent 17 years building a reputation as an elite operator and effective leader. That reputation now carried an asterisk in official files: exemplary in combat, compromised by bias in evaluation roles. He thought about the offer of bias counseling. Accepting it would require acknowledging that his perspective had been flawed, that Chin's achievements had been legitimate, that his challenges had been rooted in assumptions rather than objective assessment. The alternative was accepting that his career would never return to operational or training roles. After 2 hours of reflection, Brennan sent an email to SEAL Command accepting the counseling program. The email was brief and avoided detailed acknowledgement of the investigation's findings, but the acceptance itself represented a shift from his previous certainty. Chin's instructor assignment concluded after 3 months with measurable results. 23 students had completed the advanced course, with 19 qualifying at distances beyond 2,000 meters. 4 had achieved qualifications at 2,500 meters or farther. The success rate exceeded previous advanced courses by 37%. Sniper School Command requested that Chin's curriculum be adopted as the standard for all future advanced courses. They also offered her a permanent instructor position with the title of Senior Marksmanship Instructor, a role that would make her responsible for developing curriculum across all sniper training programs. Chin met with Hayes to discuss the offer. The permanent assignment would keep her at Quantico indefinitely, removing her from operational deployments, but giving her influence over how the Marine Corps trained its next generation of snipers. Hayes reviewed the offer. This is significant recognition, Captain. Senior instructor positions are typically held by master gunnery sergeants with 20-plus years of experience. Offering it to a captain with your time in service is unprecedented. Chen considered the implications. I'd be more effective in this role than in a staff position, ma'am. Teaching allows direct impact on operational capability. Hayes agreed. I'm recommending you accept. Your promotion board results came through this morning. She pulled up the notification on her screen. You're being promoted to major ahead of your cohort. The combination of combat record, record-breaking qualification, and demonstrated teaching effectiveness made you a unanimous selection. Chun absorbed the information. When would promotion be effective? Ceremony is scheduled for next month. Hayes closed the notification. At that point, you'd be Major Chun, Senior Marksmanship Instructor. You'd have authority to redesign sniper training across the entire Marine Corps. She paused. This is the kind of influence that changes institutional culture, not just individual capability. Chun accepted both the promotion and the permanent instructor assignment. The decision meant trading operational deployments for institutional impact, but her combat experience was already documented, and her contribution to training could affect hundreds of future snipers. Rodriguez retired after 33 years of service. His retirement ceremony was attended by over 200 personnel, including current and former students, fellow instructors, and command leadership. Hayes presented him with the Meritorious Service Medal for his decades of contribution to Marine marksmanship training. During his retirement speech, Rodriguez spoke about the evolution he'd witnessed over 3 decades. He described changes in equipment, methodology, and capability. Then he talked about the Chun qualifications without naming her specifically. 6 weeks ago, I witnessed the best shooting I've seen in 33 years. What made it exceptional wasn't just the technical difficulty, though that was substantial. What made it exceptional was that it required the shooter to prove capability that should have been assumed, to demonstrate competence under pressure that wouldn't have existed for others with identical credentials, and to maintain perfect fundamentals while knowing that any failure would validate assumptions about who belongs in certain roles. The audience was silent, understanding exactly which qualification he referenced. Rodriguez continued. That shooter succeeded, broke records, and is now training others to achieve similar capability. But the fact that such extraordinary proof was required reveals something about our institutional culture that we need to address. Excellence should be recognized when demonstrated, not dismissed until it becomes undeniable. After the ceremony, Rodriguez gave Chun his final gift, the target from her 3,000-meter qualification, professionally mounted and framed. The impact point was visible in the center, a permanent record of the shot that had required 6.8 seconds of flight time and perfect execution under maximum scrutiny. Chun accepted the gift with genuine appreciation. This represents more than a qualification, Staff Sergeant. It represents your willingness to document capability honestly when others wanted to rationalize it away. Rodriguez smiled. I just recorded what happened, Captain. Soon to be Major. You're the one who made the shot under conditions that would have broken most shooters. He gestured at the frame target. Keep this somewhere visible. When future students ask about it, tell them the truth. Capability exists independent of whether people are comfortable acknowledging it, and documentation transforms performance into permanent record that survives beyond bias. Hayes's presentation at the Senior Leadership Conference drew attendance from over 300 officers from all service branches. She used the Chun situation as a case study in recognizing and addressing bias in personnel evaluation. The presentation included timeline of events from Brennan's initial dismissive comments through the escalating challenges to the final investigation and reassignment. Hayes showed video clips from the qualifications, verification team reports, and excerpts from Morrison's detailed observations. She highlighted 3 critical decision points where leadership intervention had been necessary. First, her decision to approve the extended range challenge while implementing enhanced verification procedures. Second, her response to Brennan's procedural challenges with detailed documentation rather than defensive dismissal. Third, the institutional decision to investigate Brennan's pattern rather than treating the Chun situation as an isolated incident. Hayes concluded with recommendations for other commanders facing similar situations. Document everything objectively. Implement verification procedures that eliminate reasonable doubt. Address patterns rather than isolated incidents. Support officers who report concerns about superiors' bias. Create environments where capability is evaluated on demonstrated performance rather than filtered through assumptions about who belongs in certain roles. The presentation generated extended discussion during the question period. Several senior officers shared their own experiences with similar situations. The consensus was that bias in evaluation remained a significant challenge, particularly when held by officers with otherwise exemplary records. Hayes's presentation materials were distributed to all service academies and incorporated into officer training curricula. The Chin case became standard reference material for discussions about maintaining objectivity in personnel assessment. Morrison's team participated in joint exercises with Chin's advanced students, creating opportunities for cross-service training and capability development. The cooperation between SEAL and Marine sniper programs strengthened, producing measurable improvements in both units' operational effectiveness. During one joint exercise, Morrison and Chun conducted a long-range shooting demonstration for visiting military attaches from allied nations. They each made successful shots at 2,700 meters, demonstrating the capability that American sniper training could produce. After the demonstration, one of the attaches asked Chun about her record-breaking qualification. She provided a brief technical description of the shot without mentioning the circumstances that had required it. The attaché persisted. "I read the article about your achievement. It mentioned challenges you faced from a senior officer. How did you maintain focus under that pressure?" Chun considered her response. "I focused on fundamentals rather than politics. The shot required perfect technique regardless of why I was taking it. Once I accepted the firing position, nothing mattered except wind reading, ballistic calculation, and trigger control." Morrison added his perspective. Captain Chin's professionalism under pressure was as impressive as her marksmanship. She let her performance speak for itself, rather than engaging in arguments about whether she belonged on that range. The attaché nodded with understanding. "That's a valuable lesson beyond shooting. Capability demonstrated objectively is more powerful than capability claimed verbally." Chun agreed, and the conversation moved to technical discussion of extreme range methodology. But the attaché's observation stayed with her. Performance had been more persuasive than any argument she could have made, and documentation had transformed that performance into permanent record that would influence training and evaluation long after the specific circumstances faded from immediate memory. Chin's promotion ceremony took place on a clear October morning with Hayes presiding and Rodriguez attending as an honored guest. The ceremony was smaller than typical promotions, attended primarily by sniper school personnel and students from her recent advanced course. Morrison came with 2 members of his team, representing the SEAL community's recognition of her achievement. Hayes conducted the formal promotion, removing Chin's captain bars and replacing them with major insignia. The assembled personnel applauded as the rank change became official. Hayes then presented Chun with the Marine Corps Distinguished Marksman Badge in a separate ceremony, reading the citation that detailed her 3,000-meter qualification and Afghanistan combat shot. After the official ceremony concluded, Hayes addressed the assembled group. Major Chin's achievement represents the best of Marine Corps values. Excellence demonstrated through performance, standards maintained through objective assessment, and capability recognized regardless of whether it challenges our preconceptions. She looked directly at Chun. "Your record will stand as evidence of what's possible when talent meets opportunity and when institutions choose documentation over assumption." The reception following the ceremony was informal, with students and instructors congratulating Chun on her promotion. Several students asked about her approach to handling pressure during the record qualification. She provided the same answer she'd given before. Focus on fundamentals, trust your training, execute the technique regardless of external circumstances. One student, a corporal who'd recently qualified at 2,400 meters, asked a different question. Major, how did you stay professional when Commander Brennan kept challenging your capability? I would have gotten angry. Chun considered her response carefully. Anger would have compromised my shooting and validated his assumptions. The most effective response to someone questioning your capability is demonstrating that capability so thoroughly that denial becomes impossible. She paused, but I was fortunate to have leadership that implemented proper verification. Without Colonel Hayes, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, and Major Williams ensuring objective documentation, my performance could have been dismissed regardless of how well I shot. The student nodded with understanding. So it wasn't just your shooting. It was having a system that documented it fairly. Exactly. Individual capability needs institutional support to overcome bias. I made the shots, but the verification team, ballistic analysis, and command backing transformed those shots into recognized achievement. Morrison approached after the students dispersed. Major Chun, my command would like to formally request your participation in an upcoming joint exercise. We're conducting advanced operations training with Allied Special Forces units. Having you provide extreme range instruction would significantly enhance the training value. Chun accepted, and they discussed logistics for the exercise. The conversation reflected the professional relationship that had emerged from the conflict, with mutual respect based on demonstrated competence and shared commitment to capability development. Brennan completed his bias counseling program after 8 weeks of sessions with a military psychologist specializing in unconscious bias and organizational behavior. The sessions forced him to examine his pattern of responses to integration initiatives and confront the disconnect between his stated commitment to merit-based evaluation and his actual responses to capable female service members. The counseling focused on cognitive restructuring, helping Brennan recognize when his assessments were influenced by category-based assumptions rather than individual performance. The psychologist used the Chun situation as a case study, walking Brennan through each escalation and asking him to identify where his responses had been driven by objective concerns versus defensive reactions to capability that challenged his worldview. The most difficult session involved reviewing video footage of his interactions with Chun. Brennan watched himself dismiss her 1,200-meter qualification, demand the 2,500-meter challenge, escalate to 3,000 meters, and then search for procedural irregularities when she succeeded at each level. The psychologist paused the video. What do you see in your behavior? Brennan was quiet for a long moment. I see someone who kept moving the goalposts because accepting her capability would have required admitting I was wrong about her from the start. The psychologist continued. And what was your initial assessment based on? Brennan struggled with the answer before finally admitting. Assumptions about who belongs in elite units. Not about her specific capability, because I hadn't seen her shoot yet. I dismissed her before she demonstrated anything. That recognition was the breakthrough the counseling had been working toward. Brennan spent the remaining sessions developing strategies for evaluating individuals based on demonstrated performance rather than category membership, and learning to recognize when his assessments were being influenced by unconscious bias. The counseling report concluded that Brennan had made significant progress in recognizing his pattern and developing tools for more objective evaluation. The psychologist recommended continued monitoring, but assessed that Brennan could potentially return to roles involving personnel evaluation if his changed approach was consistently demonstrated over time. SEAL Command reviewed the counseling report and made a decision. Brennan would remain in administrative roles for 1 year, during which his personnel assessments would be monitored. If he demonstrated consistent application of objective evaluation methods, he could be considered for return to operational training roles. The decision gave him a pathway forward while ensuring sufficient oversight to verify change behavior. Chin's first major initiative as senior marksmanship instructor was redesigning the Marine Corps sniper curriculum to incorporate extreme-range methodology as standard rather than optional advanced content. She worked with Williams on the ballistic instruction components and with Rodriguez, who'd agreed to serve as a civilian consultant after his retirement, on the practical range progression. The new curriculum introduced students to extended range concepts earlier in training, building progressive capability from 800 meters through 1,200, 1,500, 1,800, and 2,100 meters as part of the core course. Students who demonstrated exceptional aptitude could continue to 2,500 meters and beyond in the advanced phase. The curriculum also incorporated explicit instruction on objective performance assessment, teaching future sniper team leaders how to evaluate capability based on demonstrated results rather than preconceptions. Chun included case studies, deliberately avoiding her own situation but using similar examples to illustrate how bias could compromise evaluation. Sniper School Command approved the revised curriculum for implementation in the next training cycle. The approval memo noted that the changes would significantly enhance Marine Corps long-range capability while also improving the evaluation culture within sniper programs. Hayes was promoted to Brigadier General 8 months after the Chun qualifications. Her promotion was accelerated based on her leadership during several high-profile situations, including her handling of the Chun Brennan incident. The promotion board specifically cited her commitment to objective standards and her willingness to address bias, even when it involved respected officers with strong political connections. During her promotion ceremony, Hayes was asked about the most important leadership lessons she'd learned during her time at Quantico. She didn't hesitate. The most important lesson is that maintaining standards requires defending objective assessment against subjective gatekeeping. Standards are about capability demonstrated under proper evaluation, not about who we're comfortable seeing succeed. When we confuse those concepts, we weaken our organizations by excluding talent that doesn't match our expectations. The response was quoted in Marine Corps Gazette and became part of leadership training materials alongside her presentation about the Chun case study. Morrison was promoted to commander and given command of a full SEAL team rather than just a platoon. His promotion was also accelerated, with the selection board citing his professional courage in reporting concerns about a superior officer's bias and his demonstrated commitment to merit-based evaluation. He maintained contact with Chun, coordinating joint training between his team and her sniper students. The collaboration produced measurable improvements in both units' capabilities and became a model for effective cross-service cooperation. During one coordination call, Morrison mentioned Brennan's progress through the bias counseling program. I heard through the network that he's actually engaging with it seriously. That takes some courage, admitting you were wrong about something fundamental. Chin appreciated the update. I hope he benefits from it. The goal was never to punish him, but to address a pattern that was affecting multiple people. Morrison agreed. Your professionalism throughout the whole situation made that possible. If you'd responded with anger or personal attacks, it would have become about interpersonal conflict rather than institutional pattern. By focusing on documented performance, you kept it about capability assessment where it belonged. They discussed upcoming training schedules before ending the call. The relationship between Marine sniper programs and SEAL training had been strengthened through the collaboration that emerged from initial conflict. Williams published a technical paper on extreme-range ballistic methodology based on data from Chin's qualifications and the subsequent advanced course results. The paper appeared in a military technology journal and was immediately adopted as reference material for sniper schools across multiple services and allied nations. The paper included detailed analysis of the 3,000-meter qualification, describing the technical challenges and the precision required for successful execution. It also presented data from Chin's teaching methodology, showing the improvement rates in students trained with progressive extreme-range instruction compared to traditional approaches. The conclusion suggested that extreme-range capability was more achievable than previously assumed, given proper instruction and systematic progression. The paper credited Chin's demonstrated performance with proving that 3,000-meter shots were within reach of well-trained snipers rather than requiring exceptional and rare talent. Chen received requests for interviews and speaking engagements following the paper's publication. She declined most of them, preferring to focus on teaching rather than publicity. However, she agreed to speak at the Marine Corps Warfighting Conference about the development of extreme-range capability and the importance of objective performance assessment. Her presentation at the conference drew significant attendance and positive response. She discussed technical methodology, but also addressed the cultural aspects of capability development, emphasizing that talent existed across all demographics and that effective organizations created evaluation systems that recognize capability wherever it emerged. The presentation concluded with a simple observation. I made a 3,000-meter shot because I developed the capability through training and experience, and because the institutional system documented that capability objectively. Both elements were necessary. Individual excellence without fair evaluation remains invisible. Fair evaluation without individual excellence has nothing to recognize. Our goal should be creating environments where talent can develop and where developed talent gets recognized based on what people demonstrate, not on whether their success matches our expectations. The observation was quoted extensively in subsequent discussions about military culture and evaluation systems. Chen's case became the reference point for conversations about maintaining standards through objective assessment rather than subjective gatekeeping, and her achievement stood as evidence that capability existed beyond traditional demographic assumptions about who belonged in elite military roles. 18 months after the record qualification, Chen stood at the Quantico range watching her 4th advanced class conduct their final evaluations. 20 students were attempting distances between 2,400 and 2,700 meters, applying the progressive methodology she developed in a standard curriculum. The results exceeded previous training cycles. 17 students qualified at their attempted distances, with 3 achieving shots beyond 2,600 meters. The success rate reflected systematic instruction combined with objective assessment that evaluated each student's demonstrated capability rather than preconceptions about potential. Williams monitored the ballistic data from his equipment station, recording wind conditions and trajectory information for each shot. He'd become a permanent fixture at Chen's courses, contributing his technical expertise while documenting the effectiveness of the new training methodology. He approached Chen after the qualifications concluded. Your 4th class just set another record. 85% success rate at extreme ranges, compared to 43% before you redesigned the curriculum. The data shows conclusive improvement. Chen watched her students celebrate their achievements. The improvement comes from treating extreme range shooting as learnable skill rather than rare talent. We give them progressive exposure, proper instruction, and objective feedback. Capability develops naturally from that foundation. Williams agreed and returned to collecting his equipment. The methodology Chen had developed was being adopted by sniper programs across multiple services, spreading the capability improvement beyond just Marine Corps training. Hayes visited Quantico in her capacity as Brigadier General to observe the graduation ceremony. She watched the students receive their advanced qualifications and spoke briefly with several of them about their training experience. Their responses consistently praised Chen's teaching approach and the culture of objective assessment she'd established. After the ceremony, Hayes met privately with Chen in the senior instructor's office. The walls displayed framed targets from notable qualifications, including Chen's 3,000-meter shot that Rodriguez had given her. Hayes gestured at the target. Does it feel different now? 18 months removed from the pressure of that moment? Chen considered the question. The shooting was always the straightforward part. Hit the fundamentals, execute the technique, let the bullet do what physics dictates. She paused. What feels different is understanding how many elements had to align beyond my shooting. Your verification procedures, Rodriguez's documentation, Williams's analysis, Morrison's reporting. Individual capability needed institutional support to become recognized achievement. Hayes nodded. That's the lesson I've been teaching at leadership courses. Systems matter as much as individual performance. We can have exceptional people, but if our evaluation systems are biased or our documentation is inadequate, that excellence gets lost or dismissed. They discussed the broader impact of the case, which had become standard reference material in officer training across all services. The Chin situation was taught as an example of how institutions should respond when bias becomes evident. Implement objective verification, document thoroughly, address patterns rather than isolated incidents, and support those who report concerns even about respected officers. Morrison visited Quantico leading a joint training exercise that integrated his SEAL team with Chin's advanced students. The week-long exercise combined extreme-range marksmanship with tactical operations, creating scenarios where long-range capability enhanced mission effectiveness. On the final day of the exercise, Morrison and Chun conducted a demonstration shoot for the assembled students and observer officers. They each attempted shots at 2,900 meters, pushing beyond the distances their students had qualified to demonstrate what continued development could achieve. Morrison fired first. His round struck 0.6 meters left of center, a solid hit at extreme range. Chun followed with her shot, achieving 0.3 meters right of center. Both hits demonstrated the capability that systematic training could produce. After the demonstration, a SEAL student asked Morrison about the evolution from the initial tensions between services to the current cooperation. Morrison's response was direct. We learned that capability exists independent of our preconceptions, and that organizations get stronger when they recognize that capability wherever it emerges. Commander Chun proved something that some people weren't comfortable acknowledging. The professional response was accepting that proof and learning from it. The exercise concluded with positive assessments from all participating units. The joint training model Morrison and Chun had developed was adopted for future cross-service cooperation, creating ongoing opportunities for capability development and relationship building between Marine and SEAL sniper programs. Brennan completed his monitoring year with consistent demonstration of improved assessment practices. His personnel evaluations during that period showed objective focus on demonstrated performance, and several female service members he'd worked with in administrative roles reported professional and respectful interactions. The SEAL Command review of his progress concluded that he'd successfully addressed his bias pattern and could be considered for return to training roles with continued oversight. The decision offered him a limited training assignment at SEAL Basic Course, teaching technical skills rather than conducting personnel evaluations, with the possibility of expanded responsibilities if his improved approach remained consistent. Brennan accepted the assignment. It represented a significant step down from his previous positions on advanced training cadres, but it provided pathway back toward operational relevance. More importantly, the counseling and monitoring had genuinely shifted his perspective. He'd spent 18 months confronting uncomfortable truths about his own judgment and developing tools for more objective assessment. He would never have the influence he'd once held, and the investigation report would remain in his permanent file. But he had the opportunity to contribute meaningfully again, teaching technical skills to new SEAL candidates while avoiding the evaluation roles where his previous bias had compromised his effectiveness. Chin received notification that her name was being added to the Marine Corps Sniper Honor Roll, a permanent installation at Quantico listing notable achievements in marksmanship. Her entry would read, Major Sarah Chun, 3,000-meter qualification record, October 2025, Distinguished Marksman Badge, Afghanistan Combat Shot 2,847 meters. The honor roll was viewed by every sniper student who passed through Quantico, making Chin's achievement visible to future generations. Her name would stand alongside legendary Marine marksmen, permanent evidence of capability that had required extraordinary proof, but now served as inspiration for those who followed. Rodriguez visited Quantico 6 months after his retirement to see Chin's name added to the honor roll. They stood together looking at the installation, Chin's entry freshly engraved among decades of Marine Corps marksmanship history. You've accomplished something beyond a shooting record. Rodriguez gestured at the honor roll. Every student who sees your name will know that capability was recognized because it was demonstrated objectively. That's a different lesson than just knowing someone made a long shot. It's about how excellence gets documented and acknowledged, even when it challenges assumptions. Chen appreciated his perspective. You made that documentation possible. Without your verification and willingness to stand by objective results, the shots wouldn't have mattered. They walked through the sniper school compound, discussing improvements Chun had implemented in future developments in extreme range methodology. Rodriguez remained invested in the program's success, consulting regularly despite his retirement. Before departing, Rodriguez shared final observation. I've been watching military marksmanship training for over 30 years. The technical improvements are significant, the equipment gets better, the methodology evolves. But the real advancement is cultural. Your generation is creating evaluation systems that recognize capability based on what people demonstrate rather than assumptions about who belongs. That's more valuable than any shooting technique. What's your experience been like? Have you faced situations where people underestimated you, whether that's in California, New York, Texas, or anywhere else? Have you had moments where you had to prove capability that should have been assumed? Share your thoughts in the comments, because your perspective matters, and others benefit from knowing they're not alone in facing those challenges. 2 years after the record qualification, Chen reviewed applications for her advanced course and noticed exceptional diversity in the candidate pool. Female Marines, service members from varied backgrounds, all applying based on their qualification scores and demonstrated marksmanship fundamentals. The culture shift was visible in who felt empowered to pursue advanced training. She selected 24 students for the next class based purely on their qualification performance and assessment scores. The selected group included 8 female Marines, the highest proportion in any advanced marksmanship course in Marine Corps history. Their selection was unremarkable because it was based on documented capability, exactly as it should be. The class began their training on a morning similar to the one when Chun had first stepped onto the Quantico range, facing dismissive assumptions and predetermined judgments. But the environment these students entered was different. They arrived with qualification scores that had been objectively assessed. They would be evaluated on demonstrated performance, and they would be taught by an instructor whose own achievement stood as permanent evidence that capability transcended demographic assumptions. Chun watched them assemble at the range and begin their equipment preparation. Some would reach extreme ranges, others would find their capability ceiling at shorter distances. All would be assessed fairly based on what they demonstrated rather than preconceptions about their potential. The targets at progressive distances weighted across the Quantico ranges, silent witnesses to the qualifications that would transform individual capability into documented achievement. The verification systems were in place, the ballistic analysis equipment was ready, and the institutional commitment to objective assessment had been reinforced by the precedent Chen's case had established. She walked to the observation tower where she would oversee their first qualification attempts. The morning sun cut through Virginia humidity exactly as it had 2 years earlier when she'd first faced Brennan's dismissive assessment and begun the progression that would shatter records and transform evaluation culture. The difference was that now, the system was prepared to recognize capability wherever it emerged, to document achievement objectively, and to address bias when it threatened fair assessment. Individual excellence still required institutional support, but that support was more reliably present because Chen's case had demonstrated the cost of allowing bias to compromise evaluation and the benefit of choosing evidence over assumption. The range went hot. Students assumed their positions and began the qualification sequence that would measure their capability and document their achievement. Chun monitored their performance with the same objective assessment she'd fought to receive herself, ensuring that the next generation would face evaluation based on what they demonstrated rather than assumptions about who they were. The shots echoed across Quantico ranges as students proved their capability under proper documentation, transforming training into qualification and potential into recognized achievement. continuing the progression that Chun had advanced through 6.8 seconds of flight time and one undeniable impact, 3,000 meters downrange.